All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be back here again at Teams Nation and just walk through how you can be a Rockstar Microsoft Teams presenter. Now, before we get going, just want to make sure, first things first, we're all good with our setup using Teams. Make sure if you're going to chat with me later, make sure your mic's working. I would love for you to turn on your video if you're able to. If not, no big deal. And let's maximize the chat function. If you have questions, in the interest of time, pop it in the chat. I'd be more than happy to jump right on it. I'm watching the chat as well on the side. And certainly raise your hand if you want to speak up. And last but not the least, just some ground rules. Mute unless you're speaking. And if your mic's on, make sure all other audios are off so we get a nice, good recording. So without further ado, let's get the conversation started. Earlier, I had in the chat, some folks come and answer this question. What is your biggest fear? So if you haven't had the chance, can you go ahead and go to this website, slido.com, enter the code 915410148, and just type what your biggest fear is. Now, if you're thinking, how is this relevant to our conversation? It's going to be relevant. So if you will be so kind, pop up a new browser, Slido.com, enter this code 9154148, and just type in what is your biggest fear. I'm not going to tell anybody. This is anonymous, so you're welcome to pop that in. All right, so we've seen being locked up, failure. What else we to be in fear, pain, failure. All right, so a bunch of people entering failure. What else do we have? Okay, so we have a couple more people typing. I can see it. We'll give it a few more. All right. Biggest fear, failure. Okay, all right. We have a few more coming in. Okay, so with that, being an embarrassment. Okay. Being stupid, to be in fear. Okay, all right. Getting it wrong, sounding stupid. Okay, so a lot of good answer. Now, we'll keep this up. So if you're still typing, continue on, and I'll get back to this. The reason why I'm asking or having you type that in is I came across a recent survey. This was from last 2 years. And the major fears, this survey was done globally. The major fears of people are, number one, snakes, spiders, heights. Public speaking is number 3, dancing in public, and then flying. So I bring this up because it's relevant to our conversation. Used to be public speaking was the biggest fear of a lot of people, be it in a virtual setting or an in-person setting. But now, as you can see, it's going down. And the reason why is because of technology, because of being able to present online, people get more practice, and that fear is coming down. So what we want to do in this conversation, in this presentation, is how can you step it up? How can you not only elevate your public speaking skill, but more importantly, be a rockstar presenter when you use tools like Microsoft Teams? So what we're going to tackle in this conversation are 3 things. Number 1, I'll make a case on why public speaking is essential, be it in person or using technologies like Teams. Second is we'll cover the roles of a presenter. So it's not just you join a Teams meeting and start talking. There's different roles that different hats that we put on. So we'll definitely talk about that. And then lastly, we'll walk through 4 practical steps on how to be a rockstar virtual presenter. So why is effective public speaking or effective presentation essential? You see, there's 3 reasons why. First and foremost, we present and we deliver a presentation to persuade. And when we talk about when we're persuading people, we're trying to sell change. We're trying to convince folks that there's a better way of doing things, or there's a new insight that we've learned and we want to share. We want to elicit intrigue and curiosity. That's why we persuade. The second reason why effective presentation or public speaking is essential is we want to motivate people. So persuading people is one thing, but we want to get people excited. We want to encourage people to start a new habit or stop something that's not worthwhile anymore, or to change a certain way that they do things. And we want to get people to be passionate and get them excited on something new. So that's the second reason why effective public speaking is essential. The third reason is we want to inform. We serve as subject matter experts to share knowledge and enhance understanding and make sure that people remember what we're trying to convey to them. Now, as a presenter, we have 5 different hats we put on. First and foremost, we are the learning manager. And what does that mean? As a learning manager, we should have a solid idea and specified set of outcomes that we want our audience to learn. So for example, in this session, I want to make sure you walk away with 3 things. Number 1, I want to make sure that you understand why effective public speaking is important. I want to make sure that you know the tips and tricks on how to do that to be a great virtual presenter. And the third thing is I want to make sure that you know we wear 5 different hats to be when we're presenting or when we're speaking in public. And that's what a learning manager does. We specify the outcomes and make sure that people walk away with it. The second thing is we're the technical resource. We're the SME. We're speaking, we're presenting because we've been there, we've done that, we've learned, we've failed, we pick ourselves back up, and we want to share what we know. The third reason, or the third hat that we put on as a presenter, is we're the company representative, especially in our day-to-day professional lives. What does that mean? You don't want to say anything that your mom won't be proud of. Not only we're representing our own companies, at least in this industry, we're representing Microsoft. So I'm not saying that everything's hunky-dory and everything has to be perfect, but whatever you say, whatever you present is a reflection of the organization you work for. You're the coach, and the job of a coach is to motivate, it's to encourage, it's to make sure people get excited that whatever they hear, whatever they learn, it's something that they can do or something that they want to pursue. Last but not the least, you serve as the host. And being a host, just like anything else, we're responsible to make sure that people are comfortable in the setting, be it in person or in a virtual setting. So little things like greeting people, good morning, or welcome for joining us today, or can everybody hear me? I want to make sure you see the slides. You want to make sure people are comfortable and are ready to learn and ready to listen from you. So these are the 5 hats we wear every time we present, be it a formal presentation like this or a sales meeting. And each hat that we wear serves a purpose and will greatly benefit your audience. Now, we talked about why presentation public speaking is essential. We've talked about the 5 different hats that we all wear as a presenter. Now I want to walk through the 4 steps on how you can be a rock star virtual presenter. The first step is intentional preparation. Now, what do we mean by that? From the moment you know you're presenting, be it a meeting with a customer or an event like this, is you have to be intentional when you develop a description or an abstract of the presentation you're going to do. For example, your title has to be short and relevant. Ideally, you don't just put something in there like, oh, best practices for Microsoft Teams. I mean, it sounds great, but it's still kind of nebulous. You want to be very specific, especially if people don't read the description of your presentation. For me, I typically use something that's very practical, so I use numbers. Make sure it's no more than 7. So for example, in some of my presentations, especially technical presentation, I would say like, 5 ways to do certain things, 3 steps to migrate. So something very specific. So when your audience sees that, in their mind, there's going to be a mental affirmation and say, oh, I'm going to learn 3 things and that's something I can do. Now, there's a reason why you don't want to make it more than 7, because mentally we shut off after anything more than 7 to 9, because in our minds, we're thinking we can only learn so much. So please do not if you have a 1 hour presentation, don't put things like 99 ways to maximize Microsoft 365, because especially for those that are new, that's a lot for them to take in. Second is, in your abstract, be very specific with your description. The framework I use is, in your description, talk about the outcome, the content, and the audience. So let me show you an example. So this is how I put descriptions together. What's the outcome? Do you need to ensure your Office 365 data is protected? That's the outcome. Second is, you talk about what the content of the session is about. In this session, you'll gain a full understanding of what native Office 365 capabilities are available and advanced solutions you can take advantage of to protect your data. Third, you talk about who the target audience is. This session is intended for those responsible for ensuring your organizational Office 365 data is protected from accidental deletion, malicious attacks, or violating industry regulations. So this is the formula I use whenever I put together a presentation or even a meeting invite. So example, right? So we talk about a title, 3 ways to protect your Office 365 data. And this was an invite actually I did a few years ago when I was meeting with a customer. And again, very similar to the description you just saw: outcome, content, and the audience. And then I put a little agenda in there. And thus far, this has been very effective as I'm preparing for my presentation or my meeting, especially when I'm using Microsoft Teams. Now, what else do you need to do as you prepare for your presentation? You have to think about how we learn. You see, our brain is not a tape recorder. We're not like young children anymore, where that they have brains like sponges. They just absorb everything. For us, the way we learn is we take incoming information and integrating with existing knowledge. In geek speak, in technical speak, is our brain's like relational database. We connect the dots, and that's how we learn. We learn by processing it and not just receiving. And I want to prove my point, right? So, okay, I'm going to do a quick exercise here. I need everybody's participation. Okay, are you ready? What I'm going to do is I'm going to flash a bunch of words, and maybe I'll show it in like 5 seconds. And your mission is you got to memorize those words, right? In like 5 seconds. And then after 5 seconds, I'm going to get those words off the screen. And I want you to type it in a single chat entry, as much words as you remember in the chat. Okay? All right, you ready? I'm going to show you words, 5 seconds. I'm going to take it off the screen. Just type it in a single chat and enter it, because I want to see how much you remember. All right, let's do this. How much can you remember? Okay, pop it in the chat, as much as you can remember. Go. Put in the chat as much words as you remember. All right, so, okay, I see it. Izzy, let's put some words in there. 3 words, 4 words, 1 word. Okay, so how much do you remember? How many of those do you remember? Okay, so let's see. All right, I'll put the words back. So how much did you get? Who got 8? Pop in the chat if you got 8. Nobody? Who got 7? Pop in the chat if you got 7. Just put 7. 6. 5. Wow, Marine got 7. All right, 4. 3. Okay, a bunch of people got 5. 3, 2. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. I don't want to embarrass you. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So friends, I'm gonna do this again. This time, I'm gonna show you a different set of words. Okay. I'm gonna show you a different set of words. Same thing. 5 seconds, and I want to see how much you remember. Okay. Okay. How much do you remember? Pop it in the chat. As you memorized it, just type everything in the chat. Let's get the chat free flowing. It's okay. So it's just a way for you to type in everything you remember. I know, you start singing, right? You start singing the song. Okay, so now let's check how much you remember. But you remember 8? Type in 8 or raise your hand, however you feel comfortable. 7, 6, 5. So as you can see, you remembered more, right? So what I'm showing you here is as you're presenting, making sure when you present information, you have to connect the dots. Information should be related. You can't just dump slides after slides of random stuff, right? Because that's how we learn. And it's no different than presenting virtually or in person. You have to consider how attendees learn. So it's a part of preparing, right? Step 1 is intentional preparation. Make sure your abstract is catchy, it's pretty clear. And as you put together your content, consider how we learn. Make sure you connect the dots. And as you connect the dots, you want to identify the main points. Just stick to what's important and visually highlight keywords or phrases. And you got to keep repetition because repetition is key as we convey information. The last thing you want is information overload. You want to be very focused. That's why you want to put your learning manager hat on and always think about what do I want people to walk away with. I want our audience, at least this audience, to walk away with 3 things. Number 1, they got to know why public speaking or presentation skills is important. Number 2, the 5 different hats people wear when they present. And number 3, the 4 steps on how to become a rock star presenter. So always think about what the outcomes are and then reinforce the learning in the presentation around that. And when you put together your presentation, I have a framework that I use. We all use slides. Now, I'm not saying slides is the only way to deliver a presentation, but I would guarantee you 95% of everybody here use slides for presentation. So this is my presentation development guide. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is what works for me and how I found effective in the last 15 years. So what's the framework? First, talk about the need. Talk about the challenge. Do you want to be a great presenter? Or do you want to improve your communication skills, right? So that's the need. Second is talk about the solution. So we're going through the solution right now. We're going through the 4 steps. And then lastly is call to action. Because oftentimes in any presentation, we may deliver a great message. We may share great content, but if the audience, if the listener walks away and not applying any of it, the learning there may go to waste because they're not able to take advantage of what they just learned. So that's kind of the framework. So how do you put that in a slide, right? So for me, within a slide, first and foremost, I don't put a full paragraph. All my slides for presentation would just have phrases. Now, why is that important? Why do you think it's a bad idea to put a full paragraph or a bunch of words within a slide? Feel free to jump on, turn on your mic or put in the chat. Why do you think it's a bad idea to put full paragraph in a slide? Feel free to speak up as well. I'm seeing somebody typing in the chat. Can't read and listen at the same time, Tania. Absolutely. Because by nature, if you put full sentences or full paragraphs, we want to read. And then we'll tune out the speaker. Whereas if it's all like this slide, right? It's all bullets. Unless I say anything about these bullets, you won't have any context. You don't really know what this means. So with phrases or just bullet or just words, you're relying on the speaker to explain what that's all about. The second tip I have for you when you put together your slides is 9 bullets max. This goes back to the earlier point I made that nothing more than 7 to 9, because that's how our brains process. And when I say 9 bullets, this includes main bullets and sub bullets, total 9 bullets. 18-point font minimum. I know what you do. If it doesn't fit in the slide, you make the font size like 8. Stop doing that. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Right? 18-point font minimum. And then lastly, this is the important part. The way I measure slides is based on time, 2 to 3 minutes. So let me explain. So for example, in a 1-hour presentation, if there's 60 minutes, for example, if I'm going to do demos, each slide is worth 3 minutes. What that means is I can only put together 20 slides, like 20 solid content slides. You know, I'm not talking about the title slides or the dividers, but in a 60-minute presentation, if I'm going to do demos, each slide is worth 3 minutes. If I'm not going to do demos, each slide is worth 2 minutes. The reason why I do that is in the 20 years of me doing this, it allows me to pace my presentation. Because I'm sure you've been there. You've been in presentations where there's 5 minutes left and then there's still a bunch of slides. What does the speaker do? They just go really fast. Oh, I have 100 more slides I need to go through. Doesn't help anyone. First, it comes across as the speaker is not prepared. Second, it also doesn't help for the audience, for the attendees to learn, because it's just so much coming, right? So this is how I measure slide. I know it's hard, but less is more. This is the most fascinating research I came across. If there's an hour presentation, 60 minutes, and assuming, right, in that 60 minutes, each slide is worth 2 minutes, so there's 30 slides an hour, 9 points per slide. So if you do the math, during that whole session, you're conveying 270 points. That's a lot. And for adult learners, after 24 hours, they'll only remember half of the presentation. So tomorrow, you only remember half of what I said. After 48 hours, you'll only remember 25%. Now, long-term memory, guess how much you'll remember next week or 2 weeks from now? Pop it in the chat. How much do you think of today's presentation you will remember a week from now or 2 weeks from now in your long-term memory? How many percent? This is a research well done. Nikki says 5%. All right, we'll see. Okay, what else? On the average, 10%, 1%, 10%. It's actually 11%. Right? So if we take this example, 270 points, people only remember about 30 points. So the question is, which 10%, which 11% do you want people to remember? And we have to be intentional about that, right? So this goes back to as we're preparing. I'm going to share all this information, but what's the minimum 10% that every single person has to remember, right? So after I came across this research, it really changed how I thought about putting presentations together. Another important part of preparation is we have to address every learning style. We all learn differently. You know, when you do virtual presentations like this, we pretty much cover the visual side of the presentation. We show the slide, we show graphics, we show videos, we show text. So that's great. We also address the auditory learning style. And the auditory learning style is a technique that we use to explain the process. You know, here's how you migrate to the cloud. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. That's very important. What we lack oftentimes when we do this type of presentation virtually is we don't address what's called the kinesthetic learning. Kinesthetic learning is the ability to allow interaction. And while we do it here and there, we don't do enough of it. And what you want to do is you want to evoke emotions, because through kinesthetic learning, people remember more. So how do you do that, right? It's easier to do this when we're in person because you could be more interactive, but remotely, you still could do it. So as an example, I have you using chat. Earlier, I used a tool called Slido where I did a little survey. Uh, you could do recorded demos. I'm going to show demos in a second. So long story short, you have to make it as interactive as possible, not just showing slides or having the speaker talk straight without interacting with the audience. And just so you know, you need to do about 5 to 7 minutes of interaction to keep the engagement going and the interaction going. Within every 5 to 7 minutes, either you ask a question, you do a poll, you do a demo, you got to change it up to keep the audience engaged, especially in this setting. So that was the first step, intentional preparation. Now you're ready to present, right? You gotta have a proactive opening, step 2. And what you want to do is you set the scene. You prepare, you dry run, and make sure you turn on your camera. Regardless if it's a formal presentation like this or a customer meeting, even if everybody else don't turn on their camera, it's okay, but you turn on your camera because that way it helps visually and your audience sees you as if you're in person as well. Tech check. Make sure it's well lit. This is actually my setup. It's changed. I kind of changed my mic and changed my camera, but this is my setup. Get good lights, get good mic, and I have a link here, which I'll share this PowerPoint, by the way, with a detailed step-by-step guide on how you set up a nice remote setup or visual or camera, video conferencing, and video presentation setup. First impression lens. So as a part of your proactive opening, like I already said, turn video on and dress up as if you're meeting people face to face. I know we get comfortable at home. We wear our hoodies and sweatpants, and that's okay for informal calls. But if you're doing presentation or sales meetings, make sure you dress up as if you're meeting people face to face and stage your background. This is actually my home study that before COVID, my kids was here. They were doing their schoolwork here, but when COVID happened, I had to kick them out. But yeah, this is what I have. Clean it up a bit, and you can do the same. For me, I don't like to use background images because it's not as authentic as I'd like it to be. So authenticity is king. If possible, have a regular background, and that can certainly add to your presentation, especially when it's virtual. Welcome your guests. If you're the host, especially for the presentation, and if folks don't know each other, say hi to everybody, how you're doing, pop some questions in the chat, how's the weather, where you're from. That will help drive engagement as we carry on with the session. Your initial pitch matters, right? What's your opening hook? Your opening hook has to be sweet and concise, because if people don't know you, guess what? In their minds, they're going to give you about 1 minute to form an impression. And within that 1 minute, mentally, they're going to decide if they're going to pay attention or not. And that's why it's important. That first minute is to set a good impression, and your initial pitch matters. You got to establish your expertise. In some cases, if people already know you, they look you up, that's great. Oh, Dux is a Microsoft regional director. He's an MVP. He's done tons of presentation. But in situations where people may not know you, you can simply say, hey, my name is Dux, and thank you for having me here. I've been doing presentations in the last 20 years, and I'm so excited to share everything I've learned. That's it. You don't need to go through, oh, I'm an MVP, RD, PMP, and you have 1 minute to form the impression. The second thing is you have to set realistic expectations. That's why early on, I said, look, we're going to cover 3 things. And you have to reinforce that so people coming in won't have a different impression or a different expectation of what they're going to learn. So that's the second step on how to be a rockstar presenter. You got to have a proactive opening. So as you're delivering the session, you got to continuously facilitate engagement. So by the way, before we continue on this, I just want to get a pulse check of about 50 or so people in this session. How is this so far? Is this useful for you? You know, pop in the chat, give me some emojis here, thumbs up, heart, or yes or no. I would gladly appreciate your feedback. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Paul gave me a heart there. Awesome. So the third step you need to do to be a Rockstar presenter is you got to regularly facilitate engagement. So how do we do that, right? How do we do that? Well, first and foremost, especially in our world, when we're pitching, talking about technology, we got to use analogies. This is a great way to facilitate engagement. So let me share this example. When I started my career a long time ago, one of the first technologies I worked with back in the late 90s was ASP.NET. ASP.NET, for those not familiar, because you weren't born yet, was one of the first awesome web technologies that use compiled code. Long story short, it's more efficient and web applications are much faster when it's loading. So there was this time when I was pitching this to a customer, and the customer I was pitching to, he was a CFO. Obviously, he's not technical, but I had to explain why ASP.NET is better. So I use analogy. So here's what I did. I said, look, you know, every Thanksgiving, I go visit with my aunt, and my aunt makes this great chicken parmesan. And I would always be there early at her house and even help her prepare this chicken parmesan. So as she's preparing, you know, chicken parmesan, we would talk, and I would sit there maybe for an hour, 30 minutes, an hour. And once it's done out from the oven, I'll be the first person who tastes this awesome chicken parmesan. Now, for some reason, as soon as that chicken parm gets cooked, my cousin would come in, he would smell it, I guess, and then enjoy that same chicken parmesan I just did. The difference is he did not have to wait. I, on the other hand, had to sit there for 30 minutes, wait for her to cook it, had a great conversation before I'm able to try the chicken parmesan. Well, that's kind of the same with ASP.NET. The way ASP.NET works, unlike other technologies like CGI or Perl or older web technologies, is the first time the ASP.NET application loads, it goes through this process that it gets compiled through the ASP.NET runtime in the .NET class. But then after it gets compiled, it loads on the browser the first time. The second request, the next person who goes to the website, boy, that website will come in so fast, right? And it works. I use that analogy all the time at that time, and people get it, right? And I encourage you to use analogies when you're explaining technical things. In fact, use food. Food is universal. You won't offend anyone, and it works all the time. The other technique is you need to tell stories. You need to describe pain points. You got to promote lessons learned, and you got to showcase best practices. And one of the things that I share all the time, especially organizations using our technology, is this tragic event a long time ago. So this was maybe, I don't know, in the mid 2000s. There was a really bad storm that hit the Philippines, and you know, a lot of people perished, a lot of people died. And one of the first rescuers that went there was the U.S. Navy from Pacific Command in Hawaii. So it was a U.S. naval ship, aircraft carrier that went to the Philippines. They did a lot of rescue missions to help survivors. And the technology they relied on is SharePoint. So imagine the ship had SharePoint on-prem, and all the soldiers out there doing rescue activities on their mobile device, they're able to access SharePoint on the ship to you know, put survivor, to put supplies, and be able to coordinate and collaborate, which is phenomenal. As you may know, in the ocean, internet connectivity is spotty, so the SharePoint environment in the ship may not necessarily sync with headquarters easily. And that's where we were able to help. So AvePoint as a company, we have a replicator technology that used low bandwidth and low latency that the US Navy was using. So we were able to help and support that mission. So real-time data was synced back to headquarters in Hawaii. So I share this story when I talk about our technology because I could have just said, hey, AvePoint Replicator has all these features, has low latency, but instead of doing that, I share the impact through story. So storytelling is very, very powerful. I encourage you to get this book, Brand Storytelling from Miri Rodriguez. She works at Microsoft. And I love how she describes it. She says, look, storytelling is the emotional transfer of information through the introduction of a character, plot, and conclusion. Another way to drive engagement is to interact with the audience. You've seen throughout this session, I've been asking questions. There's learning activities that we do, and you can certainly do demos as well. We do a lot of demos, and frankly, when I do demos, I record it, especially these days where it's easy to record. So that way you save a lot of time and you save a lot of effort versus doing it live where bad things may happen. And then questions are also very important, how you ask them. There's two types of questions that you can ask. You can ask open-ended questions and you can ask close-ended questions. And these questions can be asked for really one purpose, is to reinforce learning, is to repeat things that you've already said. It could be rhetorical, meaning you ask yourself, hey, Dux, what did we talk about early on? It could be group-based, so I've been asking you a lot of questions. What do you all think? How do you feel about this session? Or it could be targeted. Now, when you target, you just have to be very, very careful and make sure you want the person answering it to be successful. So how do you do that? First, you ask the question. What's the latest version of SharePoint on-prem? So you ask the question first. And then you pause. Now, in situations where you can see everyone, where cameras are all turned on, then you look at the folks on the camera. If they tend to shy away and not look at the camera, that means they don't want to answer the question. But for those watching you still, then go ahead and call on them. Now, for those that may not have the camera turned on, just like now, you can also target them and based on your interaction with them early on. So for example, if I ask the question, what's the latest version of SharePoint on-prem? Paul, what do you think? So Paul may respond via mic or on the chat. And as Paul responds, so Paul, go ahead and respond. You wait for Paul's answer. And as soon as he answers, you take his answer and repeat it. Well, Paul said the latest version of SharePoint on-prem is. All right, I'm waiting for Paul.
Let's go for 2013.
So that was a good try, Paul. The latest version of SharePoint on-prem is 2019. So I know we don't use a lot of SharePoint on-prem anymore, so it's not a problem. So you can take his answer. If he's incorrect, that's okay. You can graciously respond. That's a fantastic answer, Paul. But the latest version is 2019. And if it so happened he got the version correct, you can reward the answer as well. So that's just a technique that I use, and it's been very effective, especially when you're doing this in a big group. I see the point here about demo. So this is a sample demo that I have. In this demo, I record a demo, how do you create teams in batch using Power Automate. So notice this demo, I'm not just leaving it alone. So there's no audio, and I'm actually stepping through this demo as if it's live. So essentially I said, hey, let's say we want to create teams in batch. What you can do is you can go to docs.microsoft.com. There's an example. You can copy the code and you can go Power Automate. So once there's questions after the demo, that's where you can use the live opportunity. But for me, in the last couple of years, I've just been showing recorded demos. I'm talking through it as if it was still live. People won't know any different as well. But I do agree, you got to have your live demo environment ready should there be questions and you want to show stuff based on the questions that was asked. Last, some more tips around virtual engagement. If you can, have a colleague engage in the chat, especially if it's a big group. So while you're presenting, a colleague could be answering the chat. Pause and ask feedback regularly. And if relevant, have audience speak up and share. So that's step 3, facilitate engagement. So just to recap, right? The 4 steps on how to be a rock star presenter. Number one, you got to prepare intentionally. Number two, you got to have proactive opening. Number three, you got to facilitate engagement. Now, I see a question from Nikki. Do you record via PowerPoint screen recording? I actually use Camtasia for my recording. There's a lot of tools for recording, but I use Camtasia. The fourth step to be a rockstar presenter is you got to have a motivational closing. Formal closure is important. You got to summarize it. You got to have a call to action, and you encourage evaluation from people. So not only you get feedback on how the session went, but more importantly, you can improve upon it for your next presentation. And connect with your audience beyond the presentation. So especially now with social, it's so easy to connect and keep the conversation going. That way, if folks have questions further or they want more tips, they can connect with you. And that's what I encourage everybody to do as well. So with that, are you all ready to take these to the next step? So if you're ready, let me know in the chat, because I want to do this last activity before we wrap up. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to do a quick game show with everyone, and I want to see how much you've learned, right? So go to this website, kahoot.it, and enter this code. In fact, I'm going to bring it up for everyone. This is going to be a fun activity. So all you have to do is go to kahoot.it and enter this code. In fact, let me copy the link and let me just pop it in the chat so you can easily go to it. There you go. So there you go. Nikki, Kevin, April, awesome. So let's wait for a few more folks and we'll get this started. This will take only a few minutes. All right. So let me get going here. All right. So let's do one. Why is effective presentation essential? All right, put in your answer. Seems like we've reached the limit. All right. The reason why is to persuade, motivate, and inform. So everybody got it. Awesome. Next. There you go. You got the scoreboard going. True or false? We learn by incorporating new information with existing knowledge. True or false? True. Everybody got it. Nice. Next. Number 3. How much of the presentation will we remember in our long-term memory? Long-term memory, 50%. 11. Everybody got it. Fantastic. Fourth question. As a presenter, the most important role is being a good host, coach, learning manager, subject matter expert. The answer is a good host. You want to make people feel comfortable so they can learn better. Looks like April's on fire. She's got it. Number 5. What is the most effective way to learn? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, none of the above. Visual learning, the answer is kinesthetic learning. So the more activity and engagement, the higher likelihood of people remembering. Last but not the least, how often should you drive interaction in your presentation? Answer is 5 to 7 minutes. All right. So hopefully in this session, you're able to pick up why effective presentation skill is important, the different roles of a presenter, and the 4 practical tips on how to be a rock star presenter. So friends, thank you for joining me. Here's my contact info. Make sure you connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or any social media. If you have more questions or in fact, you need help with your next presentation, I'm more than happy to help you. So with that, back to you, Paul.